Alright guys, in this video we're going to look at which flicks in Rocket League are most effective and which ones you should be practicing if you want to rank up. This video mainly applies to 1v1 but it can still be applied to game modes like 2v2 and 3v3. With that out of the way, let's jump right into it. The first and most basic flick we have here is the front flip flick. This is the flick that I highly recommend beginners and even high level players should perfect, as it is probably one of the most effective yet simple flicks there is. There is two things you should think about when doing this flick. If you want to generate the most power, you should have the ball being more towards the front of your car. However, if you want the most height, then you should have the ball positioned more towards the centre of your car. Try and find the balance depending on the situation, but with that out of the way, I'm going to rate the effectiveness of this flick as an 8 out of 10 and would therefore definitely recommend. The next flick we're going to look at is the diagonal flick. Much like the front flip flick, this one is very similar, the only difference being you're going to diagonal flip left or right instead of forward flipping. Again, the exact same rules and principles apply in regards to where the ball should be positioned on your car, and overall I would highly recommend learning this flick as well, especially for those around Champ 1 to SSL. That being said, I would rate the effectiveness of this flick as an 8 out of 10, much like the front flip flick. However, the only difference being that it is slightly more difficult to pull off. Up next is the SideFlip Flick, and out of the two we have mentioned previously, it is very similar to the front and diagonal flick. This one, in my opinion, is the hardest to pull off out of the other two, however it can be really effective when done correctly. In order to do it, you want to have the ball facing either left or right at the front of your car, depending on which side you're planning on flicking it to. This flick can generate a lot of power if executed correctly, and comes in at 8.5 out of 10, and would definitely recommend putting a bit of time learning it. The next flick is the BackFlip Flick. Now, I had to think about this one a lot, and I gotta say it's probably best used in game modes like 2v2 and 3v3 to set your team up for a shot. In ones though, its effectiveness is questionable, but it's good to use depending on the situation. In order to do this flick, you have to position the ball somewhere between the middle and back of your car, and once you backflip, the ball will be sent straight vertically upwards. Again though, I would say this flick is mainly situational, or at least more situational than the rest of them. Because of this, I'm going to give it an effectiveness rating of 6 out of 10, and I'm indecisive whether or not you should learn this type of flick if you want to rank up. Moving on to the more advanced flicks now, we have the 45-degree flick. Now this is one of the most common flicks that higher level players use, and for good reason. The flick is extremely effective in my opinion, and can generate an immense amount of power. Moreover, the flick is very difficult to read, as it is unpredictable to know where it's going to be shot at. Before this though, I'd recommend learning the fundamental flicks first before moving to a flick like this, as I'd say players between Champ 2 and SSL should start to practice this flick a lot. With that out of the way though, I think this flick is extremely useful in all modes to use, and comes in at a 9 out of 10 in regards to effectiveness. Therefore, I do recommend this flick a lot. Next up we have the 90-degree flick. Now, much like the 45-degree flick, this one isn't too much different, as the only difference is that you're turning your car at 90 degrees left or right of the ball. The power you get from this is probably about the same as the 45-degree flick, if done correctly, and is slightly more difficult to get down. The main differences between both 45 and 90-degree flicks, besides car movement, is mainly to do with the situational aspect, as the 90-degree flick is probably best used in ones only, whereas the 45-degree is a lot faster to execute and therefore could probably get it down in all game modes given the space. If I were to rank the effectiveness of this flick, I would probably give it a 9 out of 10. However, I'm neutral in regards of this flick being essential to rank up because of it being the same as the 45-degree flick with added difficulty. Up next is the 180-degree flick, and I must say there has been very little times where I've had to use this flick, as there is just so much better alternatives that you can use. Undeniably, the flick is extremely satisfying and cool when pulled off correctly, but just isn't a necessary flick you should be focused on if you want to rank up. For the effectiveness of this flick, I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 10, because most of the time you're not going to have the space and time to pull off the flick effectively, hence why it's ranked so low. Now onto the way more advanced flicks, we have the Musty Flick. Now, much like the 180 degree flick, this flick requires a lot of space and time to pull off effectively. That being said, the flick does generate an extreme amount of power if done correctly, however it's probably one of the most difficult flicks in the game to do consistently. Because of this, I'm going to rate the effectiveness of this flick as a 5.5 out of 10, simply because of the fact that you aren't going to find the space and time to do it in game modes like 3v3 and maybe 2v2. Therefore, this is not really a flick you should practice if you want to rank up. Moving on, we have the Breezi Flick, aka the Musty Flick with extra steps. As if the Musty Flick wasn't hard enough already, this flick may be the most difficult flick to pull off in Rocket League, as I could only get it down about 2 out of 10 times. That being said, the flick is best used in 1v1 and can generate about the same amount of power as the Musty Flick if done effectively. This flick is probably the coolest and most satisfying flick to pull off in a ranked game, but if you fail to do it, you are likely to concede a goal. With that out of the way, I'm going to rate the effectiveness of this flick as a 5.5 out of 10, but it's definitely not a flick you need to climb the ranked ladder. So with most of the flicks covered, I've decided to create a table covering all the information I've spoke about previously, plus the difficulty and rank of which I'd say players are capable of doing the flicks. I may have missed a few flick variations, but I reckon I've got the majority of them. So to answer the question on which flicks are most effective to rank up in Rocket League, by the information given, I would recommend practicing the front flip, diagonal flip, side flip and 45 degree flick. It sounds crazy, but the simplest flicks in this game are the most effective in my opinion. This however does not mean you shouldn't try out the other flicks, by all means go for it, but in terms of climbing the ranks, I would say that you could easily get to Grand Champ by perfecting these flicks alone. If you happen to be outside the rank of any of these flicks listed in the rank column, then you'll probably struggle to pull off said flick. However, there are many other factors that go into it. With all that being said, that's going to be it for this video guys. Make sure to subscribe and like this video if you want to see more videos like this. But until then, I'll see you on the next one. Bye.